I am Will Harris. I own White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia. I'm the fourth generation of my family to operate this farm. I'm aided by my two daughters, who are the fifth, and between them, they have five grandchildren on the farm, who are the sixth generation to live on the farm.
And what is it that you do on White Oak Pastures that distinguishes you from, a typical farm?
Uh, my father operated this farm in a very industrial manner as a monocultural cattle operation, and I followed him and operated it the same way for 20 years. And for the last 25 years, we've been evolving into a very different kind of farm. Today, we pasture raise cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, and poultry on the farm.
When did you make that shift to get to this regenerative state?
I graduated from the University of Georgia with a bachelor's degree in agricultural science in 1976. I came home and aided my father in running the farm as a very industrial monocultural cattle operation. I later operated the farm on my own as a monocultural cattle operation. In the mid 90s, I started moving away from that. I moved pretty rapidly away from it. And 25 years later, I'm still moving further and further away from that industrial monocultural operation.
What made you want to do these changes? What did you see going on the land, and what made you want to go in this direction?
In the mid 90s, I was turning 40 years old, and I was increasingly conscious of the unintended consequences of the industrial commodity cattle operation I was operating, and started moving away from
Okay, because of the traditional methods. What did you not like about it that made you want to move away from it?
it. My observation became that all of the actions that I was taking to increase the productivity of my monocultural cattle operation had unintended consequences that were not pleasing to me. The impact on the land and on the animals and later on the community were things that I didn't like. I thought they were harmful, and I found ways of producing and marketing and processing and marketing my product that didn't involve those things I didn't like, which was the deterioration of the community, the welfare of the animals, and the degradation of my land.
And so they were kept on feedlots on this property when you were doing it in the traditional way, or how were the cattle kept before you're raising them this way?
Before I moved the model to the grass-fed program we have today, we ran confinement cattle feedlots here on the farm. It was really hard on the animal and the land. It was not in the economic best interest of the community.
How did you go about changing it into, like, what are the first few steps you took? Did you just take some feedlots down and start planting seeds in that area?
So when I moved away from the previous industrial model, what I did is consolidate my herds instead of having many smaller herds to two or three much larger herds. And I chopped the pastures up into smaller and smaller units, paddocks, and move towards what we do today, which is moving the cattle every single day, giving the land a really hard impact, but a long recovery time.
Animals allowed to express instinctive behavior. How are your animals able to express their instinctive behavior, and why are most farms, or how are they not able to experience instinctive behavior on those farms?
When the farmer's goal is to just raise as cheap a product as they can, then it moves the operation to confinement feeding. And in confinement feeding, the animal is not allowed to express instinctive behavior. Instinctive behavior from a cow, from a perspective of a cow, would be roaming and grazing. When a cow is confined to a very small area and fed grain out of a trough, they're denied that opportunity to roam and graze. For hogs, the instinctive behavior I would focus on would be rooting and wallowing. And when hogs are raised on a concrete slab, that's not an option for them. For poultry, it would be scratching and pecking. And chickens or turkeys or guineas that are out in a natural environment would spend their days scratching and pecking. And instinctively, they want to do that. That's instinctive behavior. So when we confine animals in the modern industrial production model, we deprive them of those opportunities to express those instinctive behaviors.
These activities of these animals, how are they benefiting the environment?
So in the natural cycle, there are plants and animals and microbes living together in symbiotic relationships. And through eons and eons, uh, when the animal does something that is for the benefit of itself, there's a more indirect benefit to the land or the plants, the environment, the microbes. And that symbiosis is part of the abundance that comes from a natural system. But when we humans industrialized food production on the farm, built silos of individual uh, production systems, whether it be cows or sheep or corn or wheat, we did away with that symbiotic relationship.
So you're kind of trying to mimic nature with the way you raise these animals here, right?
Emulation of nature is key to what we do.
All right. So my second criteria is resiliency. The fact that you have your own processor on this property. Could you talk about how that makes you more resilient and why that's so important? Why it's so important for food systems to be resilient in this day and age?
When my father's generation industrialized the food production system post World War II, which is 70 years ago, it was all about efficiency. Every decision that was made, every change that was made was to get more and more and more increased efficiency out of the system. And it was remarkably successful. They took incredible cost, direct cost, out of the system, but they did so at the expense of resiliency. It became a more efficient system, but a less resilient system. The efficiency that we picked up is great, but it resulted in a more fragile system that can more easily be broken down.
Such as the what happened in the COVID pandemic, right? You were pretty much unaffected by the whole thing because of your resilient system that you set up here. Was that mainly due to you having your processor, owning your own processor?
So during the COVID crisis, a lot of animals were euthanized because the processing plants couldn't receive them, and because in that feedlot confinement production model they had, they couldn't live for a long, extended period of time in those circumstances. So the answer became euthanizing animals. During the COVID crisis, we didn't euthanize anything. First of all, my system was resilient enough that we were able to continue work. We never missed a day. Now, we could have, but we didn't. We never missed a day. So that was not an issue. But had we missed work, had we had people sick and not been able to process, my animals would have lived on. They were in a resilient enough environment that the fact that they lived another few days or weeks or months would have caused them to be a little bit bigger, but they wouldn't have died.
That cow from a traditional industrial farm, it wouldn't have lasted as long. You're saying?
In an industrial farm, when those animals are in feedlots, they are in a artificial environment that is not. They're literally dying of the excesses that kill most people. and they would not live for a prolonged period of time.
Okay, yeah, got it. And my third criteria that I have is has to do with soil quality. One of your podcasts, you mentioned Qantas, the environmental company that did the study on your soil, and you also mentioned that things in your soil get oxidized down. What do you mean by that?
Oxidation is a chemical reaction in which the oxygen combines with, in the case of carbon and oxygen, it's CO2, carbon dioxide, that's gets given off. Oxidation is rust. When a piece of iron rust, it's oxidizing. It's a chemical reaction in which oxygen becomes a part of the molecule. In ours, in the case of carbon, it's not given off. It becomes a part of the soil. It becomes organic matter.
Okay, gotcha. So you're but for the soil quality on your farm, it's a higher quality and it's done naturally because of animal impact. So the soils, one of our biggest issues today is that we're losing soil. We keep hearing that our topsoil, we got like however many harvests left. But in your system, we don't have like, a limited amount of harvests left because it's a sustainable animal agriculture system, and it's because primarily due to the animal impact on your soil. Could you just talk about what these animals are doing to your soil?
So the way we manage our pastures is emulation of nature. Our pastures are established in permanent perennial grasses that breathe in carbon dioxide that's free in the atmosphere, turn it into carbon compounds that are part of the plant. Some of it's above the ground in foliage, some of it's beneath the ground in roots. In the case of cattle, they come through and they graze off the top. And some of that carbon that they consume becomes their carbon based meat, flesh, fat. Another part of it goes out their back end in the form of feces, much of which is worked into the soil through dung beetles and microbes. A certain amount of it is blown back up the atmosphere, which is where it came from. There's a percentage of that. In addition to that, the roots grow as the plant is recovering. When the cow bites it off, some of those roots slough off, and that part gets trapped in the soil and becomes part of the soil. Then we move the cattle. The cattle are only allowed to graze one day. When we move them, the plant starts to recover, grow more foliage on top from the cows to eat next time, more roots in the bottom, and all that pounds of material come from the atmosphere. It's greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide that's consumed by the plant and turned into plant material. So it's a cycle from here to the plant to the animal and back again, over and over and over.
Because a lot of people are being taught to believe that cows are producing greenhouse gas, adding to the greenhouse gas total in the planet, but that's just not the case because they're in a cycle. It's just the cycle you just described. They're not producing more of it
Not only are they not producing more, they're helping mitigate some of it that's already there.
because of the impact they have on the pasture, helping the plants sequester more. Okay. So your cattle, could you just talk about the whole process of rotational grazing and how your cattle is rotated on your different sections of your property?
So this farm that we're on now is 3,200 acres, 3,200 acres. And that 3,200 acres is divided up into about 150 30-ish acre paddocks. There's a range there, but it's about 30 acres. And every paddock is fenced in and has water and shade. And we rotate the cattle herds, or three herds of cattle, through those pastures. And each pasture gets about 60 days to recover after a grazing. The herd is put in the morning. It spends the day there, and during that day, that grass will be eaten from however tall it is down to fairly short. And then the next morning, they'll be moved to the next one. But then that fairly short grass that was grazed for 24 hours will have about 60 days to recover. It'll grow back up. And the grass actually acts like a carbon pump. It pulls greenhouse gases out of the air to make foliage. It's spit off, as I mentioned before. Some of it becomes feces, some of it becomes flesh, some of it is blown back into the atmosphere through flatulence. But it's over and over and over, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful system. The land gets better and better.
The description sounds beautiful, and seeing it was beautiful. That's how bison moved around the American landscape, because they wouldn't just stick around one area. After they grazed it, they'd just move on to another area. Now, your 24 hours of time that you give the cows to graze on a section, the 24 hours and the 60-day, that ratio, how did you come up with that ratio?
Well, and those are not super hard numbers. They can vary. I mean, if we have a drought, if we have, I'm near the Gulf of Mexico, so we don't have super cold winters, but we do have a period of dormancy. So there are periods of time when it's not exactly 60 days, but it's generally about that. But that came about through trial and error to see about how much recovery I would get. We kept honing it and fine tuning it till we got down to those rough numbers. And it can change. I mean, we could have a prolonged drought that would make it different. This is what works at this point in time on White Oak Pastures. I may be able to move them through faster 10 years from now when the land is better. I probably couldn't move them as fast 10 years ago before the land got as good as it is now.
Would you say your land is still it hasn't reached its climax of improvement yet? It's still got a long ways to go, or it's close to it?
I don't think our land has reached its peak yet. I think it continues to get better and better.
Wow. And do you think there is a peak? Is that peak like what a natural grassland would look like or something?
I suspect that there probably is. I don't know that, but I suspect that back when the first Europeans started slaughtering the first buffalo, and they say that the topsoil was 10 feet deep. It may not have been getting better. There may be a point of equilibrium. It's a long way from where mine is right now.
Yeah, that's something I don't really think about, because I just see a beautiful farm. We got to remember that your farm was farmed in the traditional industrial way by your father, your great grandfather, and yourself for some time, and it's still healing. It's in that healing process. Even though it doesn't look beautiful, but it's actually encouraging that it's gonna keep on improving as the years go by.
And because I live here and because I see it every day, I can tell it's still getting better and better.
That's really encouraging news. The fifth criteria is water holding capacity in regards to your soil quality. How's that? How are those two things related?
So when land is a 0.5% organic matter, which is what mine was when it started, it's pretty much a dead mineral medium. It's a lot like a dirt parking lot. As the organic matter builds up, the land becomes more and more like a sponge. Think about it, it's carbon material. Carbon absorbs water. So in my case, it's gone from a 0.5% organic matter to 5% organic matter. That's a 10x improvement. I'm told that 1% organic matter generally will hold about 27,000 gallons of water on an acre of land. I assume that's true. But if that's true, then my land will hold well over 100,000 gallons of water per acre, whereas previously it wouldn't hold but about 10,000 gallons of water per acre. So it builds that, and the water cycle is so important. I'm in the coastal plains of Georgia. We get 52 inches of rain a year, and that's good. and it comes fairly evenly throughout the year, and that's good. But sadly, some of it comes in really big rains. It's not real unusual to get a 4 or 5 or even 6 inch rain. And when that happens, if you've only got a 0.5% organic matter, you're going to catch very little of that. And the water running off the land is going to do the land harm.
Wash away some of the topsoil. Yeah. Yeah, and those numbers you just said, 10,000 gallons, 20,000 gallons, those are huge numbers. And it goes to show how much more efficient regenerative farming can be if you have greater soil quality in like a natural way. And it absorbs more, can handle those big rain events. Yeah, that's amazing. Oh yeah, so you focus, I know you said this on podcast, you focus on supplying to your local region more so than like everywhere you can. Like you're not too interested in supplying Washington State or like Maine. You're more concerned about your local region, right?
My preference would be to market my product as locally as possible. I think that the kind of farming I do does not really lend itself to exponential expansion the way that industrial food has done. And it is more of a local food system. Now, how local can it be is something I don't know right now. I found it necessary to build a slaughterhouse and have spent, in fact, we've got about $30 million invested total land, uh, animals, assets. And to make that work, I need to sell about $25 million worth of product per year to make it all work out. I would love to sell that $25 million worth of product in a 10-mile radius of Bluffton, but that's not going to happen. So we have to reach further and further out to find enough market to make it work. We currently, sadly, ship beef to 48 states, or ship product to 48 states. I don't want to do that. I really rather people in the Pacific Northwest feed the Pacific Northwest, and New England feed New England, and me operate down here in the deep South. But currently, the acceptance of my product is such that to sell the $25 million worth of product I need to sell, we have to reach much further out.
That's why I chose that as a criteria. Being able to focus on local, or else the transportation is harmful for the environment as well. And they talk about methane and cow burps, but transportation creates way more greenhouse gases, and I have the studies ready to prove that. Some of the things I compared, like cow burps to transportation, as if they're near each other, is they took the life cycle assessment of a cow and compared it to the direct emissions of transportation. So, and no one's done a life cycle assessment of transportation, and I don't think that'll ever be done because of how expensive it is, and the difference would be so staggering. I don't think they want to show that.
Well, and the greenhouse gases that we put back up through flatulence and whatnot came from to the atmosphere a very short period of time earlier. I mean, it's turning, and it's not putting back up as much as it's pulling down. So when you think about it, that whole argument is just really ludicrous, and I think it's been intentionally blown out of proportion by opponents of the red meat industry.
Yeah, that could be a real possibility. I wouldn't take that out of my mind. Now, the sixth criteria is your intermingling of species, different species being kept together, being able to interact with each other in some different ways. How is that beneficial for the environment and for the animal welfare and the finished product?
There are symbiotic relationships to these animals by raising them together. We talked earlier about pigs and goats. The internal parasite that affects pigs does not affect goats, and vice versa. So having the two out there is very beneficial towards the spreading of those internal parasites. What a sheep would prefer to eat is a little different from what a cow prefers to eat, a little different from what a goat prefers to eat. They're all ruminants, all grazing vegetation. But what's more of a desirable cultivar for one is less desirable for the other. So there's many different advantages. Nature abhors a vacuum. If you look in nature, you don't nowhere on no ecosystem on the earth do you see just one animal or just one plant or just one microbe. Everywhere there's a whole plethora of plants and animals and microbes living in symbiotic relationships with each other. And as much as we can, that's what we try to emulate here.
And so if you had only one animal on the same land and you never introduced another species of plant that maybe your cows didn't eat, it would overpopulate that landscape, and this is how the imbalances
And I
happen.
and I did that for years, and we'd have to spray those plants with a herbicide to kill the ones that the cows didn't want to graze. And there were unintended consequences that were negative to doing that.
Sometimes there's these huge explosions of bug, a certain locust or something, and they just like come in these big waves and just decimate crops, and then you need to use pesticides. But is it true that like that overabundance, overexplosion of that species of bug, it's because of a lack of biodiversity? Because in nature, one species of insect would never like increase to those numbers because there's always some predator, some bird species that's supposed to be eating it. So that's why the biodiversity is needed.
I think that in nature that there's a balance. There are predators and prey, and that if it's left to its own devices, it balances itself out. I'm not saying it won't ever get one side a little bit, but in the long term, it'll balance out. When we humans, the example you use of an insect predating a crop, preying on a crop, and so we see that happen, and so we spray that insect pest with a insecticide, and it kills it. But it also killed the beneficial insects that would prey on it. So then when it comes back, it's worse than it was.
Yeah.
And we see those kinds of things happen over and over again. Imbalances in nature due to humans using technology to, in a very short-sighted way, achieve a goal.
In Silent Spring, the book Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, she said that those big explosions of population of insects, they're actually caused by monoculture, because if you have like one type of plant, then the one insect that eats that plant, its population is obviously going to go up unnaturally, and that's actually like a human made problem. Those huge overexplosion of an insect population. This question, this criteria is your animal to land ratio. What kind of animal to land ratio is needed to do like rotational grazing and stuff? Because each animal needs to have a certain amount of space to itself. What would you say that is, and what kind of ratio is required to do rotational animal grazing?
Well, that's an impossible question to answer because it's so situational. What if you want more sheep, you're gonna have to have less goats and cattle. I mean, it's highly situational, and also from the ecosystem perspective, what works well here certainly wouldn't work well on a mountaintop, on a deep valley. It's just very ecosystem sensitive. You've got to find the balance, and it does take some trial and error, and it will change. It'll never be perfect, but maintaining that proper balance between land and livestock is critical. But it's in, and you don't ever reach a point that, okay, this is it, I got it. And it gets better and better and better.
Constant
But
improvement.
it will require constant adjustment.
Those are the type of questions, that the answers that people want, of like linear system thinking. But like you said, it's highly situational. It requires constant observation. requires you to be connected to the land deeply.
You're right. People want those questions to have those very succinct, concise answers, but they don't.
Nature is way more complex than a lot of man-made systems.
Correct.
As you slowly switch to regenerative style of farming, there were chemicals in your soil, right, that you used while you were farming it traditionally. How did you go about managing that? How did you get those chemicals out of your soil?
Well, I don't know of any way you can just take those chemicals out of your soil. Most of those chemicals have a half life, so they at least theoretically they should be less and less and less. But it's a problem, and truly, those chemicals that I put on my land will be with us maybe for all my children's life. But at least theoretically, it should be getting better and better and better.
Yeah, because nature can heal itself.
Nature, because nature can heal itself. That's exactly right.
It's really good at that too. It just takes time, and that's hard to gauge how long.
Yeah.
Like Paul Saladino said in, I don't know if it was either your podcast or the one with the Sacred Cow authors. He said like, we're not trying to save the planet really. We're trying to save our human race. Because the planet will be fine at the end of the day. It can readjust.
I agree with that. The planet will outlive us.
Oh yeah. I agree with that as well. Um, do you have one more symbiotic relationship example you can give? Like a specific symbiotic relationship example, such as the parasite one, and any other one example like that?
We talked about the fact that when you're grazing land, some of the plant species are desirable by sheep, but not by goats. Some by goats, but not by cows. So that would be an example of symbiosis. The fact that we put hogs on land and they really root it up in a quest to dig for roots and insects. But that long and in the short term, it's damaging. But in the long term, it's symbiotic because it benefits the land. It loosens it up, and the hog manure is rooted in, and it's just more fertile. There's so many. I'd really have to think about it, but it's chickens scratching and pecking and defecating on the land. They if you leave them too long, they'll make it barren, but they leave all that fertility there. So when it recovers, it'll be better than it was.
I like how you mentioned that because we have kept chickens in our like half acre backyard, and I had never kept chickens before, but they picked the grass up to the point where the whole area I kept them in turned like into soil and mud. Like it looked kind of disastrous. But after we processed our chickens, we didn't add chickens there for like another 2 years. So everything regrew, and we didn't even seed that little area. It just whatever fell in there carried by the wind. So it just literally regrew with such a diversity of weeds and even tree saplings. And now we're kind of growing out this little circle of a forest in our backyard. So I got to kind of see that firsthand in a little microcosm.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool to see that. I forgot if you already answered this. Do you let your chickens break apart the cow patties? Like, do you let them into the where the cows were?
Yeah, we. I used to try to move the chickens behind the cows and keep up with them, but that was not successful. Cattle move faster than chickens. So now we uh, just devote a paddock to the poultry and we rotate the cows through it. Then we go to the next one. But then next year, we'll start another paddock. So we continue to move it.
Okay, gotcha. I think that's it. I got all the big questions out of the way.
Yeah.
Depends how you raise them. Yeah, I think that's it. I just gotta now go on your website and see all the studies that's available there and incorporate it into my final draft, especially that Qantas study. I also purchased Gabe Brown's book in your shop, the Dirt to Soil.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a lot more studies in that book. But yeah, I got all the questions I wanted to ask you done. I guess the last thing I wanted to do while we're still recording is have you sign a copy of your book.
Not sure. Yeah,
Got it
absolutely.
right here.
All right, good.
Oh, no, I didn't bring the pen though.
I got one. Tell me how to spell your first name.
First name Sadat. S-A-A-D as in dog, A-T.
S-A-A.
S-A-A-D as in dog, A-T as in Tom.
Great. Thank you, Sanat.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Come around for the handshake.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I really do appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for your visit.
Yep. And I'll edit all this out. I'll edit whatever doesn't need to be in the final
Yeah.
video.
All right.
Pauses and stuff.
No, that was very original with the sign the book. That was smart.
Plus, like now, nobody can say that you didn't sign that. You know.
That's
I
right.
got it on video.
Yeah, there you go.